Waruna, Vajrāsana,
the undefiable Dhamma.
The factors that make an offering highly effective and rewarding. What cause a particular offering to yield the greatest fruits and the greatest benefits are the wholeheartedness and the sincere admiration, positive impression, and mental gladness. The magnitude of the offered item has very little to do with it. The Jethamana monastery could never be built by that poor layman. The monastery was built by the nobleman Anepidu, having spent loads of wealth and time. When he offered the monastery, the poor layman happened to be immensely gladdened by the meritorious act, and he pronounced his sincere admiration wholeheartedly. Owing to the power of his sincere admiration and mental gladness, he was rewarded with a golden abode in Tautisa. The nobleman Anepidu was rewarded with an almost similar silver abode situated downwards from there. Now the respective rewards are testimony to the meritorious energy that was generated by each individual. Having spent a fortune, the nobleman Anepidu was rewarded with a silver abode. The poor layman, with only his admiration, received a golden abode above that of the nobleman Anepidu. A question is being asked about being disheartened caused by not being able to hold an offering ceremony as one prefers. This remorse is twofold. One part does not fall under the patiganusha, or the latent disposition of hatred. It does not fall under resentment. Therefore, this part is not sinful. One might be disheartened by not being able to give alms as he would have liked to. That is not sinful or unwholesome. Thus, not all mental disturbances are unwholesome. Lord Buddha once was traveling somewhere, and the people on the street hurried back with all sorts of delicacies to offer to the Lord Buddha. Many of them had great wealth, so they could afford it with not much trouble. There was one person who was greatly impressed by and convinced in the virtues of the Lord Buddha and wanted to offer something to the oncoming group of monks led by the Lord Buddha. He was so poor and was struggling to eat and drink himself, had nothing at home either. He searched everywhere and found some grains of broken rice. He separated a few grains of rice that were edible and got them cleaned with water. He searched the house a little more and found some jaggery or a few drops of treacle spared at the bottom of a bottle. There was a little bit of oil as well. That was all. And he thought hard to come up with some food item with the little ingredients he had, so that he too could contribute to the offering. He washed the broken rice portion and ground them to obtain some rice flour. He mixed it with the treacle and the oil. He did not have enough oil to fry it. He mixed everything into a lump, got it boiled. This was no food item. Whatever it was, that was the best he could come up with, but it was barely edible. He came to the place where the arrangements have been made to hold the offering ceremony, and he was so taken aback when he saw the food items that were there on the tables. They were so exquisite, and they smelled so good. He knew what he brought had no place among them. He was ashamed to place it on a table where everyone had kept the offerings that they had brought along. He could not give a name to whatever he brought. He was worried about others seeing it, so he covered it with a piece of cloth, and he kept his offering hidden inside and withdrawn himself to the back of the crowd. He was so disheartened about his misfortune. The omniscient Lord Buddha saw everything with his divine vision. Everyone was waiting for the Lord Buddha to come to offer him their delicious food offerings. But he deliberately walked along with his bowl closed. The gathered devotees were unable to offer anything. The Lord Buddha came in front of that poor man and presented the bowl, accepting his offering. He was overjoyed. He exclaimed in joy and admiration while offering the food item that barely resembled a flat bread. Lord Buddha compassionately ate that flat bread. All other delicacies were disregarded because of the sheer compassion towards the poor man's sincerity. There is an important point that we need to understand from this incident. If a person is able to make an offering to his maximum capacity, that becomes very special. A rich man might be able to offer lavishly. With all of the wealth at his disposal, it might mean nothing to him. It could be easily affordable. But another person might be able to afford only a piece of bread based on his spending capacity. That is the maximum he could offer. Giving the best one could give is very special. This has a deep meaning. This specialty is not easily understood. When a person is born to this world, he becomes entitled to some sustenance to maintain his life. This is a side that is not known to many, an important hidden piece of Dhamma. Sabbe satta ahara titika. All sentient beings sustain their life with some sustenance. No human being is born without the entitlement of some amount of sustenance. Each one has a daily entitlement for sustenance. That amount is fully deserved by each person to nourish himself. But there are instances where individuals tactfully earn much more than that. They might call it a justified method, but in fact, this entire society has not been designed to facilitate a justified earning. By design, it forces the individuals to tactfully use injustice for personal gains. Take the example of the compensation given to labor force. The workers sometimes take trade union actions demanding for higher salaries. Suppose in a particular workplace, the salary has been determined by such forced methods. Even a new worker that is recruited gets the same inflated salary. But this is not the deserved salary for the labor hours he put in. Individuals have got together and have enforced these salary levels as accepted. When you consider all things, the salary is higher than what they deserve. But they managed to get a higher salary tactfully. In society, the price of everything is decided by supply and demand forces in line with the economics. If something is rare, for example, certain types of labor, it is possible to demand abnormally higher salaries. The garbage collectors performed some strike action to demand disproportionately higher salaries. They could because nobody wanted to do that job, as the job is not deemed respectable. But due to the strike action, the garbage around Colombo city accumulated and the situation became uncontrollable. So the authorities had to surrender to the salary demands. Considering the level of skill required for that job, the salary demands were abnormally higher. But there was no other option but to give it. Even the new recruits are offered the same higher salaries. The salary level is not deserved. One of the workers in this example could say that his earnings that come from his salary is received in a just manner. But that would not be entirely correct. The Lord Buddha said that if an offering is made out of the earnings that are obtained from an honest living by the sweat of one's brow, that would be earned in a just manner. Earning one's money by the sweat of his brow is the key here. Such earnings come from his own hard labor. It is not earned tactfully while enjoying luxuries. These earnings are righteous. Even the little earnings made with exerting honest labor is honest and righteous. And with that little amount, if someone buys something to offer, such offering would be more righteous. It might not be as exquisite in the materialistic sense, but it is ranked higher in terms of righteousness. Suppose a rich, corrupt person makes an exquisite offering from his unfairly earned money. That offering might be exquisite, but it ranks very low in terms of justice. That is the difference that we need to notice. An unfair, expensive offering is easily defeated by a humble, inexpensive, but righteous offering. There were practices of offering crops and the service of men in the ancient Brahmin society. They were regarded highly in those days. The Lord Buddha pointed out that they are not even worth minute levels of the worth of a humble, inexpensive offering that is made by an innocent poor man. The meritorious energy of the inexpensive but righteous offering far exceeds the merits of that expensive offering. The Brahmins did not like it, and they protested as to why such great offerings were demeaned. They could not come to terms with how that inexpensive, humble offering could be ranked so highly. The Lord Buddha preached on the righteousness of the offering this way. Those rich men would have earned their living by killing animals such as cows and goats, by killing poultry with animal cruelty. They would have forced the slaves to work hard. Those might have been how those expensive offerings were funded. It might have been exquisite, enormous, and expensive, but it is unfair. The poor man, having earned his money by the sweat of his brow, made a righteous offering. Although it was humble, inexpensive, it would have generated loads of meritorious energy which cannot be compared with the minute levels of meritorious energy generated from unfair, expensive offerings. This is why Lord Buddha had those comments about those expensive offerings. No one has to worry about not being able to fund lavish offerings. Do the best you can within your limits. the humble offerings could become enormously rewarding in terms of the meritorious energy they produce. I know of one instance where a similar thing happened. A project was underway to construct a stupa. Donations were collected from willing individuals. Many people donated in high amounts, and some promised to provide this much of sand and that much of bricks for the construction work. And there was one poor person. In fact, he was surviving on whatever food that was given to him by others. That much poor. He lived in a small cabin, had nothing to donate, but wanted to contribute somehow. In his cabin, there was a bit of a veranda. He broke it open and extracted 4 bricks and washed them clean. And he went to a river bank and extracted some muddy sand from the bank. He washed the sand thoroughly to wash away the mud and obtained some amount of clean white sand that would have sufficed to make cement plaster to fix in those 4 bricks. He went and handed over the bricks and the amount of sand, mentioning that it was all he could offer. The monk who led the project did something praiseworthy. He kept those bricks and the amount of sand separately, and at the auspicious time of laying the first brick, he asked someone to bring in those bricks and sand. At his instructions, they used those bricks and the very same sand to make cement plaster to cement the bricks. The humble but admirable donation of that poor innocent man was commended highly. It stood head and shoulders above the rest of the expensive donations. This is a norm or the natural pattern in which the merits are being rewarded. The other donations would not have come from direct sweat and hard labor of the donor. They might have been individuals doing jobs that are ranked highly in societal norms. They would have had some asset to fund the donations easily, such as lands or estates that they considered theirs. The earnings would not have been funded by their labor. There is also a concept called meritoriously blessed abundance or pinata pahalavima. Nowadays, most of the abundance that many people enjoy is not of that sort exactly. Sometimes the 4 great treasures are manifested to certain individuals. But the meritoriously blessed abundance or pinata pahalavima is a different concept. It is very rare nowadays. There was a certain nobleman in the Lord Buddha's time. He had 10 exquisite diamond rings, one for each finger. They were so valuable. One day the king saw these rings. I guess it was King Kosala. He wanted to have some rings for himself. He checked up on the nobleman and found out that he was a very wealthy person with a lot of assets for himself. Even the king's treasury had less assets. The nobleman had much better possessions in his palace. The king wanted to rob the riches, and, driven by his greed, he sent a unit of soldiers to invade the palace. Meanwhile, the nobleman was with the Lord Buddha listening to Dhamma. He had no regard for the riches. He preferred to be a monk, renouncing all those materialistic wealth. The king, meanwhile, was invading the nobleman's palace. The walls of the palace were polished thoroughly. There was a water canal surrounding the walls of the palace, and the wall captured the reflection of the army from the water underneath. Now the walls displayed the reflection of the army. The king thought that there is a sizable army inside the walls of the palace and was afraid to attack. He thought that the nobleman had somehow known about the attack and got himself prepared in time. He knew that he did not have the upper hand. He retreated for the time being, thinking of returning back with more reinforcements. The king then visited the Lord Buddha, and he was surprised to see the nobleman with the Lord Buddha, and he accused himself of organizing an army to fight against him and now pretend to be spending time listening to Dhamma. The nobleman then explained the possibility of the king being deceived by his own army's reflection on the wall. The king too realized that he had been mistaken. The king then declared that he is capable of gaining all those riches as he is the king and that he has legal right to do so. Then he caught a glimpse of those diamond rings. The king declared that he could take over those rings as well. He declared that all objects and individuals within his kingdom to be his property, and that he could enact a law any time to confiscate everything as he wished. The nobleman simply told the king that the king may do so if he wishes, but without the nobleman's permission. He moved his hand towards the king and asked him to take off the rings if he wanted. The king tried to remove the rings with sweat running all over his face, but he could not remove a single ring. The nobleman asked if he could not remove any. The king replied that he could not. Then the nobleman simply asked the king to wait until he himself gave the rings to the king willingly. The moment he started to move his hands, the rings came off and fell into the hands of the king. He even offered all his riches to the king. He said that he wanted nothing to do with them and that he is after something better. And he explained his plans of being ordained as a monk. From this story, we can see how the meritoriously blessed and righteous abundance of a certain individual can never be robbed by another. This is the specialty. Some righteous abundance can never be robbed. Another one is not incurred with such thoughts, and in case it happens, it would be avoided in some way or the other. It becomes impossible to get on with it. The righteous abundance is of this nature. Nowadays, they are so rare. We might designate what we have as righteously earned, but without a righteous administration, the social norms of righteousness would not amount to actual righteousness. Nowadays, the countries are governed forcefully. The citizens are forced to pay income tax and all sorts of other taxes. And the citizens do not give it willfully. And the salaries are all paid with such money that was collected forcibly. The treasury does not have anything that was given with the willingness of the citizens. What is in the treasury has been robbed by force. Those days they were given with the willingness of the citizens. The noblemen gave their consent to administer countries based on a standard accepted manner. Things were not grabbed with greed, ill will, and delusion. With non-greed, goodwill, and non-delusion, the earnings became righteous. The governing bodies took their earnings righteously. As they were righteous, they could not be harmed by anyone. This is a vital factor in having a peaceful administration. We do not have that sort of an administration nowadays. We might get high salaries, but in reality, it amounts nothing in terms of fairness. Consider the example of the paddy that is harvested from a paddy field. We can say that it is earned with our honest labor, with sweat, blood, and tears, so to speak. We do not have the methods that were used in those days for it to be fair and righteous. Those days, when the crops were harvested, certain parts were left out for the consumption of different parties. A specific area was left without harvesting for the benefit of the birds. The first and the prime part of the harvest was offered to the Buddhism. At the earliest time, when the paddy seeds start accumulating nutrition, those paddy seeds were removed. The still maturing paddy seeds were processed with hand, and grains of rice were obtained to make milk rice to be offered to the Buddhism as the first as well as the prime portion of the harvest. When the first paddy seeds are removed, it is done by hand with care. The seeds are still raw. The nutrition had just begun to be gathered inside the seeds. The outer cover is removed by hand after crushing them carefully. It is not possible to apply more force as the seeds are not dry yet, and it could become damp if crushed with force. After removing the outer cover, the grains of the rice are separated, and everyone gets together to prepare a meal with it to be offered to the Lord Buddha and his Mahasangha. The prime portion of the harvest is offered this way. Then while harvesting, a portion is left out for the consumption of the birds. When the normal harvest is collected, as the paddy becomes mature, the prime portion of the harvest has already been offered. This is an ancient method that was in use. This method, at least for namesake, is still there. Then a part of the harvest is kept aside for friendly deities. The deities, when they were humans in their previous lives, would have constructed the irrigation system, including the reservoirs, lakes, canals, and all the paddy fields. They are remembered with gratitude, and they were provided with their entitled portion. In those days, the dead ones who had done immense service to the society when they were alive were designated as friendly deities or Ishta Devata. Then in the proper order, portions were kept aside to the parents, elders, community leaders, respectively. And then the remaining harvest, after the prime portions have been given, was shared among the farmers who were working together in cultivating and harvesting the paddy. Then some portions were also kept aside for the benefit of the poor. Whatever remaining was taken up by the owner of the paddy field. By now, 3/4 of the harvest would have been distributed. The 1/4 that is left is righteous in all respects. This is how the earnings are made without being in debt to the other worldly beings. From that point onwards, the person who consumed what was righteously earned received nothing but prosperity. And in the next round of cultivation, a similar pattern would be followed, with each round only to witness more prosperity. There would be abundance in harvest, removing obstacles and the damage caused by insects and microbes. These were the living practices of the good old days, and with their disappearance, we are now facing nothing but troubles. We had righteous methods of earning, which was an integral part of the Buddhist practice. Our ritualistic practices, or charitra varitra, were of this sort. Charitra referred to whatever the practice among which the noble thinking pattern can be found. Varitra referred to whatever the practice that were avoided. Our Sinhalese ancestors did not take part in Varitra. They upheld whatever the practices associated by the nobles. The Lord Buddha and the Mahasangha is referred to as the nobles. If they deemed something as bad and harmful, and therefore took no part with them, the rest of the society followed their lead and shaped their lifestyle accordingly. The society reverently followed the ritualistic practices or charitra varitra, knowing what should be followed and dispelled respectively. Associating with charitra and dispelling varitra became their second nature effortlessly. These are the Buddhist ritualistic practices that were followed. Because of following such practices, they did not face many obstacles. The reason why things are different today is the fact that the charitra varitra are no longer followed. We are proudly mentioning the prosperity that was there in the time of the King Parakumba, just to feed our nationalistic egos. Though we talk about our national pride rather pompously, we are unable to return to the past prosperity. Those days, no pesticides, insecticides were used, but we had prosperity which is seemingly impossible to return. We are not offering the prime portion of the harvest in the same way. Therefore, the prosperity is bound to vanish. We have to be aware of the speciality and the importance of preparing the offering in a righteous manner as we discussed. The key is not the size of the offering. Rather, it should be a righteous offering. And it should be offered with sincere admiration, positive impression, and mental gladness. And it should give to qualities of conviction, morality, generosity, and wisdom within the one who offers. Those, as well as the noble virtues possessed by the one who accepts it, could cause a particular offering to yield the greatest fruits and the greatest benefits. This is how an offering would generate immense
Waharaka Thera Waruna, Wajrāsana.
the undefilable Dhamma.